long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, the special edition.
Hello and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 20, The Double Cross. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Greetings.
Greetings.
Hello.
My energy up energy.
Get that energy up.
I know. I'm up. I'm excited. I'm interested in talking about Star Wars. I've heard a lot about it.
Well, what a coincidence. We have a Star Wars podcast, so that's perfect.
Excellent. Episode 20. I mean, I can't. Every time we do 5 episodes, I guess I can't spend 5 minutes patting myself on the back. I just find it hilarious that we've gotten to 20 episodes.
Why hilarious?
I don't know.
There's a lot of Star Wars to talk about.
I think a lot of the haters and the detractors were saying that we couldn't make it to 20 and that we were slipping. I was hearing some people on Hot 97 saying that we aren't real Star Wars, that we're just Johnny-come-latelys.
Just as long as they don't put us on the Summer Jam screen, I'll
exactly.
Think we'll be all right.
People just out there wanting to beef with us. God, I think should we go out and start like a Twitter beef with another Star Wars podcast?
Maybe.
I don't know. Just seems really thick.
I was about to say no, and then my brain went, I wouldn't be opposed.
I don't know. Like which one? We'd have to pick on somebody.
I think we could find a right one to.
We could pick on somebody weak. Somebody like with like less chemistry or something. I don't know. Like you guys, Star Wars rhymes are weak. Weak. I don't even know any good hip hop put downs that aren't excessively filthy.
Yeah, there are fewer of those out there. You can't even say that someone uses a ghostwriter anymore because then no one seems to care about that anymore.
Yeah, that is kind of funny. I did just a quick aside. I did spend like 20 minutes yesterday because I couldn't think of anything better to do with my time trying to find out why people hated Iggy Azalea because I don't know anything about her. And then I'm all of a sudden like, first I thought, why are they just picking on this Australian girl? Then I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then I kind of felt like I can kind of understand.
Yeah, you're up to speed. It really doesn't take that much to get up to speed on why people dislike
up to speed. I just thought she was the fancy gal. And then I realized that she's not even the best part of that song. So what are you going to do? But that's a summer jam from 2 years ago. Or last summer. And we're here, the summer jam in 2015.
It's the end of summer. It's no longer summer. It's your fall. It's your fall jams. There's not really like fall jams. You hear about summer stuff. Like summer's a big season when all the the windows are rolled down in the cars and the radio is blasting. If people still listen to terrestrial radio, I guess they must.
They have to.
Yeah.
I tell you,
but,
maybe
you don't really hear a lot about fall tunes.
You know who the ultimate fall jam is?
What's up?
Simon and Garfunkel. You get your
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
You get your PSL and your sweater, and you go crunching some leaves underfoot on a nice fall day. You put on some parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, and just kick back. All right. Yeah. Enough of this twaddle.
Yeah.
Let's get on this. Let's get on.
See, summer here the weather is warmer here for longer, so we skip basically right from summer into winter most times. So
it's sunny here.
We don't really have that opportunity to bust out the acoustic guitar and lay down some contemplative jams.
Not even during fun. Is it Fantastic or fun? Is it Fantastic Fest?
So Fantastic Fest is a film fest that's going on right now. Fun Fest is a music festival, and that takes place in a couple months. And ACL, I guess, is in a month or so. Less than a month. No, is it this weekend? I think this coming weekend might be ACL.
What does ACL stand for?
Austin City Limits.
Okay. I was like, wow.
Yeah, we don't have an anterior cruciate ligament festival, Robert.
Exactly. So have you had a chance to go? You haven't seen any movies, right? You've been busy.
No, I haven't seen any movies.
And they're not showing Star Wars, so really, what's the point?
They're not showing Star Wars. They are showing Turkish Star Wars, though.
Oh, I have seen Turkish Star Wars.
I think this year's festival is sort of built around a series of those sort of Turkish versions of American or British movies that are kind of weird and off the wall, like The Shining. No, it wasn't The Shining. It was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Some mutual friends of ours were in town, and they're still in town as of our recording this. But they were showing me some of the movie posters for some of these movies. So the Turkish Star Wars, I would imagine most people listening to this podcast are familiar with. But there was also they did. When they imported or remade or whatever you want to call it, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the movie poster has Jack Nicholson from The Shining on it, but then also there's like Dracula on the bottom of the poster for some reason.
Oh, nice!
It's completely bizarre.
Well, we've spoke to this before on the show in its earlier iteration. You have visited Turkey.
Yes.
Did you find any
Istanbul and
Turkmenistan? No,
not really. I wasn't really checking for it though. I will say that.
Wait, what did I say? I think we had a crossing.
Oh, okay. We cut out, and then I answered your question based on what I assume you asked. So what did you ask?
No,
what did you ask me?
So was it Turkmenistan? Did you go to Turkmenistan? Is that in Turkey?
No, I did not go to Turkmenistan. That's a different country.
But I assume from your answer you didn't see any Star Wars related stuff there.
No.
We'll just go. Let's go with that, and then we'll dovetail ever so gently into the topic of this podcast,
which is a nice transition into
a 300.
Speaking of Turkmenistan, on Facebook this week,
exactly, where I don't think you can get Facebook.
That's right.
They have Turkish Facebook, which is like a remake of Facebook, and they just take the best parts of Facebook and MySpace and a little bit of Google Plus.
Yeah.
So I don't know what company so what is this? What company made this, or was it sponsored by Facebook? This 360 degree speeder run on Jakku.
Yeah, I guess it was exclusive to Facebook, although I saw it embedded in lots of other websites, so I don't know.
Yeah, if you click on it, though, you end up back on Facebook. That's the thing.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I guess it is similar to them partnering with Instagram to release that micro teaser
that was
thing.
The worst.
They're partnering with all the hot social media brands that... Although it seems like they're partnering with the brands that at least parents are aware of, right? Like they're not doing Snapchat.
No, that's not entirely true though, because John Boyega now, I think, and Daisy Ridley are now on Snapchat.
Well, but okay. So maybe that's coming. I guess parents know about Snapchat now. And they know about Vine. I don't know what the new social media outlets are that parents don't know about.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of in that realm where you know how they say when you get to be a certain age, you can't hear certain frequencies. I think I'm at that age where I don't see social medias. I don't see them until like later on. And then I ask my cousins' kids who are in their 20s, and they go like, "I'm 20. I'm 23. What do I know? I'm old compared to these." It's like, okay.
It
Anyway,
moves so fast. Regardless, there's a video with the digital rendering of a 360-degree, I guess, view of Jakku as you're zipping along on, I guess it's Ray's speeder or someone's speeder.
Yeah, kind of looks like the sideways fudgesicle, as I like to call it. Yeah, you kind of go through the. Well, I mean, I think it's 2-3 minute thing, and you're going at speed, maybe not speeder bike fast, but the real interesting thing is you can basically, you can look in 360 degrees and see. It's almost like being on a virtual set, even though I would say that the actual quality of the image is probably what they would use in an animatic, meaning it's not screen ready. There's there's a little bit of what do they call it, draw in, when it's kind of a video game term. It's like how far on the horizon you can see without an image popping up. So like when there at one point there's a speeder, which for some reason, like the first few times I watched it, I thought it was a Wookiee on it, but it's not. It's like somebody wrapped in a cloak, and they make a kind of a Wookiee-ish or a Tusken Raider type sound, and then it spins off. But if you watch them spin off, it just disappears. It's not even like a good fade out. But
yeah, I mean, it is being oversold a little bit as like, oh, look at it, this immersive experience that you're dropped into this immersive environment. But like you said, the rendering isn't like super top quality. Like, it's decent.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
It's certainly better than like Myst, the video game, was, but it's not what I would call, photorealistic or anything. And either for that reason or in addition to that, you're zipping along past a crashed Star Destroyer, and the Star Destroyer itself doesn't feel like it has the right mass to really sort of be there to give you that immersive feel. Like it doesn't feel to me like you're really, going past this massive ship. It just feels like, oh, look, there's like a mock-up of a Star Destroyer.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, I mean, it's great that you can load this in a browser in 20 seconds, but considering off playing video games now, it's like you have a 360 degree world and that you can explore, and you can walk around, and you can go around stuff. Now, if they did something like that, I think I'd have been more impressed. But as a tool for somebody to like I say, animatics, I remember looking at the old From Star Wars to Jedi VHS, which I think has been repeated on the Blu-ray extras. I'm not entirely sure. Mm-hmm. There was always this great idea of how Lucas, basically his animatics for the first Star Wars were just cut together World War II footage from old movies of like cockpits and German whatever battles and Japanese Zeros. This was 1982 at the time technology, where they took Star Wars toys like the 12-inch and then the smaller ones, and they would, depending on the perspective, they would put it on a rough foam core or cardboard speeder bike, and then they would tape a very cheap video camera to it, and then have a guy run with it with popsicle sticks on the end of it, and creating an idea for the director of how the scene was going to go. And I guess that's what this technology is supposed to be. The previs as they like to call it. Yeah.
And this is, and in some ways this is sort of I'm guessing the first step towards what we read about in that article about the ILM X Lab, the sort of R&D shop that ILM has now. And there's more about that we'll get to in a minute. But, they talked about this idea that, oh, well, if you're in the movie theater or wherever you're watching the movie, at a certain point, you might be able to have, a tablet with you and, go and go inside the scene and explore the environment of that scene and see other things that aren't actually in the movie and, create your own movie and things like that. And so it feels like this is sort of the first step towards introducing people to that idea where, like, in the film, let's say you might be zipping along the speeder and you'll get, some POV shots and you might get some shots, from the side, but you don't get that full 360-degree view, and then you can go in on your tablet and get that view and see what else is going on in that world around you, or around the character in the film. And so in that sense, yeah, they're sort of advertising this technology, I think, as a way to say, hey, this is maybe what's coming next, or hey, isn't this exciting? Look what we can do now.
Yeah, it's kind of like why, and we're probably going to touch on this a little bit later, but it's this kind of idea that it seems that now that they're going for more of a quote immersive experience.
Right.
Whereas in the past it was kind of like, you were left to your own devices to theorize and
right.
to stuff. But now
that's the whole point of having a director. The director has a particular point of view for what they want to show in the movie, at least ostensibly, and you let them do that. And then this is completely flipping that.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to sidestep the criticisms of some of the prequel stuff, being like, well, hey, you could look at it however you want. If you didn't like it, it's your fault. You don't have a good eye. Or I mean, they're not saying that, and this is just one aspect of it. But there's books, and like I said, we're going to get to it probably later. Books like What Happened the Day Before or the Week Before, and that kind of idea. It's every single minute of this new cast or the characters is going to be somehow documented for the public to peruse at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say you had said something about how some of this of the design of that small, I don't know, ship graveyard of Jakku had kind of put you in mind of some of earlier art.
Yeah, so it got me thinking, because you're driving by all of these wrecked ships. Like there's a Star Destroyer, there's an X-wing, it looks like an AT-AT at one point. Just all this wreckage, which we've known that's sort of what Jakku is now. Now meaning in the time frame of The Force Awakens. And I hadn't really put this connection together before, but there's something. I was reading something on StarWars.com this week, and it was basically just a piece about banthas and how the banthas that we saw in A New Hope sort of developed from the original concept, and the word bantha or banta or something, similar words to that had been kicking around George Lucas's scripts for a while in different configurations.
Yeah.
And so then eventually they just appeared as these, kind of pack animals or whatever kind of animals that the Sand People have with them. And so in this piece on StarWars.com, they show the original Ralph McQuarrie painting that he did for that scene, or to illustrate, the Tusken Raiders and the Banthas. And there's it looks almost like a rib or a rib cage of this curved metal coming up out of the sand. And, I had seen that painting many, many times before, but I had never put together until that moment, reading that thing not long after, a day or two after the 360 video came out, that, I wonder if the whole idea of Jakku as this kind of graveyard for ships, or at least this place where you have this wreckage coming up out of the sand, if that just the idea of that itself was inspired by this McQuarrie painting. And, the idea of this graveyard of fallen starships is not like, that's easily an idea that they could have come up with independently. And so I'm not strongly claiming that that's what happened, but we know that they are referencing the Ralph McQuarrie art a lot, both in Rebels and then in these new movies. And Jakku itself, there are other parts of Jakku that are inspired by other Ralph McQuarrie art paintings. So there's that archway or gate that we've seen a couple times in different places in one of the trailers, I think, and certainly in the behind the scenes video, which is great. It looks great. And that's inspired by a Ralph McQuarrie painting from the original trilogy. And so, given that we know at least some elements of this world of this movie are inspired by McQuarrie art, I wondered. I was like, oh, I wonder if, because that's such an unusual piece of that painting, that original painting, having that. Like I said, it looks, almost like a rib. It looks like, it's metal but it almost doesn't register that way. But then they didn't ever use that in the movie, as any part of Tatooine. So it's sort of ripe for the taking for them to take that idea and sort of blow it up on a larger scale and make a whole planet like that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, if you're thinking, and just a quick aside, yeah, the whole, like, the word bantha, a lot of times people have kind of pointed to that Edgar Rice Burroughs in John Carter of Mars had that banth or whatever they called it, which I don't know. That could, I do know that that inspired it, but yeah, but again, to what you're saying, it's like, even one thing that it looks like Lucasfilm has learned from George Lucas and his thing is that you don't throw a good idea away.
Right.
And it makes
any idea.
Or any idea. If it's a bad, if George, it's my idea. But there's the whole, there's a whole idea, like, well, what if Jakku is kind of, it's a ship graveyard. What if it's kind of a metaphoric graveyard for, this concept of being tied to, Macquarie's artwork and being like, okay, well, I mean, I guess, and I'm jumping ahead, but this idea that, we've only seen a smidgen of the greater universe that they're going to be giving us in December. We've seen a lot of the stuff visually that we've seen in, books and descriptions in books is a lot of like, well, this looks like this is familiar stuff. And I'm wondering if maybe this is Jakku is kind of the clearinghouse where if the first section of this movie is there, and then once you've established, well, this looks like Star Wars, and it sounds like Star Wars, and it feels like Star Wars, then they can kind of unravel that present and show you like, oh, well, this is kind of our new concept. This is our artwork. This is where we've moved on from the idea where, there was Star Wars and the prequels were like, oh, you'll see the precedents for the things that you saw in the original trilogy, but in more refined and high, like almost like, the comparison of like, Downton Abbey, the way people lived in Downton Abbey versus how they lived during World War II or something like that.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, thematically, I think they're trying to reestablish. I mean, Tatooine, if we think about it, is really, the Tatooine we see in Episode 4. It's a society, kind of a fringe society, having experienced, 20 some odd years of an oppressive regime of a government. The economics are tied down where it's basically like, well, around here we farm for water, and on the weekends we go look for power converters downtown. The kind of idea.
Right. Maybe
Jakku is kind of setting that up. Like, 30 years of civil war, this is where we're at. We're basically scavengers. This hasn't been good for anybody. So it's almost like thematically they're kind of setting us up for that same kind of idea. That's like, we're on the cusp of change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. I think it's great when they bring back, something that evokes Macquarie. At least gives you a center. So you're not just like, like that's the number one problem with all science fiction films or high fantasy type stuff. Where it's like, no matter how good the source material was or thing, if you drop somebody in without like a kind of frame of reference where it's not just a lot of characters talking, it's just like, oh,
right, and explaining the word, like using the exposition to explain everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great amount. I mean, there's a lot of exposition in the first Star Wars, but it's all exposition that is only tangentially related to the problem at hand. It's like, Jedi Knights and Clone Wars, that stuff really doesn't come into play until Empire. Because really, it's just, we have to get this princess, we have to get this droid back to our princess. Yes, there's the betrayal of Luke's father and all this heavy stuff weighing on Luke's mind, and then the death of Kenobi, but it's not really tied into, obviously a greater mythology like it does later. So you can kind of take it or leave it. You can kind of just... in maybe some ways that's kind of what like I said, they're trying here. It's like, maybe you can come into this in Star Wars, even though it's part of the greater mythology. It's like, you aren't going to be responsible to know. You definitely won't be responsible to know the prequels. Well, right. That being said, they are putting an awful lot of weight on Darth Vader in this, supposedly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in our rundown because I think it could be interesting to talk about it in the context of this idea that Jakku being a graveyard for all these downed ships and everything is sort of a metaphor, or it's a literal expression of where the entire universe is at this point in Star Wars, where it's 30 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, and you have, as we are now reading in Shattered Empire and Aftermath and all of these other stories that are cropping up, Uprising, the Return of the Jedi, blowing up that second Death Star and killing the Emperor, like that wasn't necessarily the end of all fighting between the Imperial remnants and the rebels. And so, that lasted for a while, but then at some point it would think it would have to end. I mean, even though there's still they're not called the Rebellion. What are they called?
Resistance?
The Resistance, yeah. Which I assume is maybe something similar to like the French Resistance in World War II. And you have this First Order, but we still don't have a sense of how much control the First Order has over the galaxy. We still don't have a sense of politically, like, who is in charge of this galaxy. Is there a new Senate? Is there not a Senate? Is it Supreme Leader Snoke? Who is it? Yeah. But so that is a way to transition into something that we found out or heard, I guess, just in the last couple of days, which is that what we have seen and what we know of The Force Awakens so far, either through the trailers or even the Lego sets that have gotten released, anything that we know about The Force Awakens right now is only really the first third of the movie. Apparently, the first, I guess if the movie is about 2 hours, that would make it, the first 30 to 40 minutes of the movie, which is, I'm not surprised. When I heard that, I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. Just because, I can't imagine they were going to give away, too much. But, thinking about this idea of Jakku is this kind of metaphor or this synecdoche of the entire universe, right? That this whole thing is like a graveyard, and you have to you're scavenging from what's left over. What we do know is that, Finn at some point crashes on Jakku and meets up with Rey, and then they leave Jakku. We know that at some point they end up on Starkiller Base, or at Starkiller Base, I guess, because they're the toys that have Starkiller Base next to their names.
Yeah, he's got some snow on his jacket.
Right. And I assume I think Rey goes with him. So, maybe then that's what this movie is doing. It's, it's saying, okay, we're starting out on Jakku, where, we're scavenging what we can from the original trilogy, really, and as you point out, from the Ralph McQuarrie art and everything. And then at some point we have to move on. We have to, there are new battles to fight. There are new adventures to have. We have to sort of push forward with this. And that's, so you start out there, and then the rest of the movie, you got to go somewhere else, and you start setting up what the other stories are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's story-wise, that's probably smart, and economic-wise, I mean, and just practicality wise. I mean, again, like, you know, spoiler alert or whatever, they're still like these Harrison Ford, you know, Han Solo's ultimate fate kind of has rumors have been popping up again that like that's, you know, every indication is kind of like, you know, Harrison Ford is kind of like talking about how, you know, very hushed concepts, just like, oh, there's something about this, you know, something about this story that was different. And it's like, you know, there is a certain finality to it, or a changeover. Like, I mean, a literal torch passing, you know, the idea of that, of that lightsaber. And yeah, it's funny though, because I guess maybe they looked, you know, there's practicality. We're dealing with people in their 60s and 70s, and that's, you know, not necessarily for high fantasy action kind of stuff. That's not going to be a great focus. I mean, I know that even when Disney was putting together Iron Man, you know, they were kind of very hesitant to let Robert Downey Jr., who was only in his early 40s, take on the mantle of Iron Man, because they're like, I don't want some 45-year-old guy trying to, you know, be the, you know, the shepherd of this new idea. And so now it's kind of like,
yeah.
But also, I mean, they've seen, having 20 some odd years of expanded universe, it's almost like they've kind of seen, they've already had they've already done a test. It's like, well, what happens? Well, we came up with like 85 books to, you know, diminishing returns, and eventually now we've pushed our characters so far out that they're, you know, they're in their 70s, and it's like, what do we? And then we've kind of run out of ideas for them. So it's, and that's part of the reason they probably, you know, they rebooted the EU. Though, as a quick aside, it's amazing how they will dip into that lore thematically. Like if we go back to Jakku and being the idea of being a graveyard planet, remember, obviously it came up in Timothy Zahn's Dark Force Rising that the planet Honegger, I think it was, the Nogri planet that Princess Leia and Chewbacca visit, that the whole reason that, so for people who don't want to read the book, there's this great subplot in the trilogy about that Vader had a group of assassins that were like these stout, kind of stealthy, almost like reptilian type characters called the Nogri that would do his bidding, and they would act as his bodyguard. And then when Vader dies, they go on to protecting Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's the de facto leader of the Empire. And then later on, when they realize that through they're tasked with, I'm really going off, sorry guys. They're tasked with trying to find Princess Leia, and then when one of them actually
Lady Vader,
they smell her and realize that she's actually she's Darth Vader's offspring, which puts them in a quandary because they're supposed to be doing the bidding of the Empire, but they're also not betrothed, but they have a life debt similar to the Wookiee life debt. Well, later on, we discover through like this diplomacy that Princess Leia, that the planet Honegger, which their planet was devastated by two capital ships fighting, and then they crashed, and all the noxious chemicals and, you know, ship fuel and just the detritus of the battle basically devastated their planet. And that's kind of how Vader, it's kind of a weird thing. We don't really understand how it's like, later on they find out that the new empire is actually artificially extending the blight of their planet in order to keep these people subjugated, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that the idea of the devastated planet, I mean, I don't know how much Jakku is supposed to have been devastated by this. You know, was it a desert planet during the battle? I assume it was, because I think they refer to it in the aftermath that it was already a desert planet during before the battle. So it wasn't like, it's not a situation like that, but it does evoke that in my mind. Kind of like, oh, they're kind of reusing this idea of the, you know, ships crashing or fighting. I mean, there was a ship battle over obviously the first Star Wars movie, there's a battle in space over the desert planet. Nobody crashes.
Yeah. I mean, and even if it was a desert planet to begin with, maybe you do wonder, okay, so what happened to this place's economy where you have all these ships crashing all over the place and, maybe destroying businesses or not, why was, because you have to imagine, we have to wonder why these ships were fighting over Jakku to begin with. What was it about Jakku that made it somehow valuable to both sides? And it could just be that, I think Aftermath gets at this a little bit when they're talking about which planets, to care about or not. That, for the Empire at that time, at least, they're trying to just save whatever they can and trying not to show weakness. And so they're going to defend, whatever territories they have. And so maybe it was as simple as that. But maybe there was some larger reason that, both sides thought that Jakku was that important. And then because of that battle and because, all the ships crashed onto the planet and kind of ruined what happened, that doesn't exist anymore. And like you said, everyone's reduced to kind of scavenging parts from these ships to build whatever they can.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to what you were saying about the idea of, obviously the battle didn't end at the end of Jedi, but it also makes me feel that maybe the big stuff, like they show the Star Destroyers crash, but those things have obviously been there for 30 years. So maybe the era of these big capital battles, everything is on a small scale now. It's like it's like trench warfare. It's inches of ground being, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what, if they really went in and said, we researched what the effect of a long civil war, a long military action in an area. This is kind of how it ends up, or maybe I'm overthinking and I'm adding too much real life concerns to essentially a fantasy framework.
Right. So I mean the other thing I thought when I heard that basically everything we know about the movie just comes from the first third of it is like, wow, that seems like it's a lot to pack in, because from what we've seen, right, Finn, crashes on Jakku at some point, meets Rey. We know that there are a couple gangs on Jakku, so maybe there's a fight with them. At some point, they meet up with Han Solo and Chewbacca, and who then, find, maybe that's the same thing. They find the Millennium Falcon. There's a dogfight between a couple TIE fighters and the Millennium Falcon. And then again, at least Finn and Rey head to Starkiller Base. We see the First Order doing stuff at Starkiller Base. We see Kylo Ren doing some stuff. We see Poe Dameron doing some stuff. We see Leia and the two droids at some kind of, base or hangar or something. I haven't even talked about Captain Phasma, right? She's doing something. So, I mean, that seems like it's a lot to pack into 30 to 40 minutes. But maybe it isn't. I mean, we've talked about before that the first, 30 to 40 minutes of A New Hope seem pretty leisurely. But there's actually a lot that gets packed into those first 5 or 6 minutes. And then from then, when you end up on Tatooine, the pace kind of slows. And even then you still have a lot of story beats just in those first 30, 40 minutes in terms of, you have the Tantive 4 that gets taken over, and then you meet Darth Vader, and then you meet Princess Leia, and Princess Leia gives the plans to these droids, and then they end up on Tatooine, and then they end up with the Jawas, and then the Jawas go over to the Lars Ranch, and the Lars buy these droids, and then one of them runs away, and then Luke tries to go find him and runs into the Sand People, and that's when they meet Ben Kenobi, and Ben Kenobi starts talking about Jedi and the Force, and then they go and they go back to the Lars Ranch, and they're dead, and so then they go to Mos Eisley, and then they meet Han Solo and Chewbacca, and then they get in a shootout, and they fly out, right? That's all roughly the first 40 minutes or so of the movie. It might be a little longer. It might be a little longer.
That's
like
50 minutes. Yeah, like 50 minutes.
But even if you cut out the bit where they end up in Mos Eisley, and even if you cut out the bit where the Lars, Owen and Beru Lars get killed, right? That's still a fair amount going on in those first 40 minutes, even if the pace is not, rapid fire. So, maybe it doesn't seem like it's overkill that, everything that I just mentioned with The Force Awakens, that all happens in, 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, and the nice thing that the Lucasfilm, well, I don't know if nice thing, but the one thing that Lucasfilm doesn't have to worry about is they don't really have to establish much about a third of their cast.
Right.
I mean, it's like even robots. It's like people understand, like a BB-8 or whatever. It's people understand how droids work.
Yeah.
In Star Wars, and so they can kind of focus on. I mean, if they it really depends. I'm like, I'd love to see what the meetings in Lucasfilm right now when they're. I wonder if they've actually written the scroll. The scroll. Yeah. Like, that's, to me, those 3 paragraphs, it's usually 3 paragraphs, right? 3 paragraphs which will kind of set the tone for where they, where the movie starts. I mean, I think that's important because that is, it's essential, at least in the first 3 movies, essential tone setting for the idea where it's like you can save so much. I don't even think, I mean, is a scroll like an even considered exposition? I guess it is. It's just like, I mean,
it sort of is. It's saying, oh, hey, here's where the story is right now.
I mean, the funny thing is that they do such a good job of it in A New Hope that they literally have Lucasfilm is now doing an entire movie, 2 hours of film based on something that they wrote in like a sentence in the scroll. It's like
right.
They don't really need to do it. I mean, it's fun that they're doing Rogue One, but they really don't, because nobody ever questioned. Yeah. Even though it's like in some of the expanded universe in the comics or whatever, the radio dramas, they always love to dramatize like, oh, how they got it. But it really is not essential to know. It's not like anybody at the end of Walking into Jedi was saying like, are they ever going to tell us exactly how we got that? We got those plans. Actually, no, because they're on to other plans.
Right.
With Bothan spies and whatnot.
Yeah. And even, I mean, I'm curious now to know whether the crawl for Force Awakens is going to even mention the events of Return of the Jedi, right? Because if you think of A New Hope, and obviously this isn't quite fair because Lucas hadn't made Episode 3 yet, but he sort of knew what the story was going to be, prior to the events of A New Hope,
right?
Or at least he claims to. He had that napkin that he scribbled everything on. But for A New Hope, when it's telling you like what you need to know for that opening shot in order for that to register, like he basically just tells you what had been happening immediately prior. He was like, okay, we're in this galactic empire. It's evil. They've built this super weapon, and there's this Princess Leia who stole the plans, and now she's trying to get them to the rebellion. That's really all you need to know. You don't need to know anything about, well, there's going to be this guy Darth Vader, but he used to be Anakin Skywalker. And so, but that was like 20 years ago, but you need to know that. And, the rebellion, it used to be that this happened, and the Empire, the Emperor is this guy who used to, be a Sith Lord. It doesn't try to give you 30 or 20, I guess, 20 years worth of backstory. It only gives you and what you need to know immediately for that opening shot, really, or that opening scene. Right. And so I'm curious now whether The Force Awakens will take the same approach and just tell us what we need to know for what I'm assuming that opening shot is going to be, panned down from the crawl to that troop dropship that we've seen with all the First Order stormtroopers lined up somewhere. That's a guess, because that would be sort of consistent with the way the other movies have opened. But you're basically, we're gonna get information about, okay, there's this thing called the New Order, there's a thing called the Resistance, and this is why they are in this current location now.
Right.
That would be sort of in keeping with the original trilogy. What I'm worried, because this would be sort of poor. This would be that kind of over exposition that you've been talking about would be 30 years ago, they blew up the second Death Star. And then since then, they've been going back and forth, and this happened, and the Empire went down, but now there's the First Order and the Rebellion. Well, they're kind of the Resistance now, and we're not really sure what happened to Han Solo. I guess we'll find out. And then Princess Leia is over here, and Luke Skywalker has gone in hiding. And, they're going to give us... I'm worried that they're going to give us more information than we need for just that opening shot, for just that opening scene.
Yeah, I mean... And that's the thing. I mean, and I'm making huge assumptions about the nature of the story. I mean, if there's these concepts that have never really been depicted in Star Wars, like, well, to a great extent, like shifting loyalties, like, yeah, okay, we could say Han Solo, his original loyalty is to himself, and then he learns, altruism or whatever, and idea. And Lando, although he did sell them out to the Empire, I mean, I think what he did was expedient for his own survival. It wasn't, it wasn't a thing like Lando's like, oh, I can't wait to fuck over the guy that took my ship from me or something. So I mean, this high idea, Finn starts out as a stormtrooper. Now we're also like, I mean, people have said, oh, he's actually an agent for the rebellion, right, or whatever. But I don't believe that. I believe this is a thing where it's the idea that he starts on one side and ends up on the other.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
I think so too.
I don't know if it's an idea where he, where his decisions are, like I said, they're expedient decisions because of self-preservation, or they're, he actually has a sea change where he's like, I was fighting for these guys and now I want to fight for this side, kind of idea, which I don't think has really ever happened, except, the idea that Vader turned on the Emperor, but he did one act, and that was a selfish act to save his offspring. So again, it wasn't like a change in,
right. I mean, yeah, because we still don't know what exactly it is that makes Finn switch over.
Right.
Right, and so that could be interesting.
And there's a lot of like, oh, I'm sorry, they telegraph it in the teaser a lot about like, there's been an awakening, and then his head pops up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm starting to hear rumors that he's, okay, yeah, we see him with the lightsaber, we see him with this. I'm getting some, rumor stuff from the rumor mill that that's a bit of a red herring. That
Yeah, I think so. Because that's been my sense all along that. We're seeing him with a lightsaber, but I think that's just because that's the weapon he had on hand.
Yes.
And not that he knows how to use it, and that they're playing that up as sort of a bait and switch for people.
Almost like they're doing some kind of, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording, the idea that maybe this trilogy is almost like them remaking the original trilogy. And so they're thinking up, balancing personalities. It's like, if we're flipping around, it's like maybe Rey is more of the Luke Skywalker, the person who lives in the bum end of the galaxy, hoping for adventure, but kind of stuck circumstance. Finn is the more argumentative type, maybe not, he's a soldier, but he's more of a kind of a Princess Leia, like a wisecracking kind of person, like a practical person. And then some people have, it's like they're not going like, oh, this is exactly like Luke. It's like they're playing around with the personalities, where Poe Dameron is the hotshot pilot, but he also has that Princess Leia thing where, he was born in it. If we're talking about the new comics, if we're assuming that he's the, he grew up in this, well, no, he didn't. He grew up in the post Empire, but he grew up in a military family where, Princess Leia grew up in a Senate family where she understands the Senate. Poe Dameron understands the idea of the military and whatnot. So it's kind of like I think they're playing with our expectations a little bit of that kind of our own idea of like, oh, well, the girl is going to be the Princess Leia, and, or whatever. I don't know. I'm
Right.
making a huge jump. I mean, we'll all know in December how wrong I am.
But you're not alone with that. I think everyone is sort of in that position where there's a lot of guesswork going on and a lot of speculation.
Yeah. Well, I think we should change the name of this show to Rampant Speculation, but
but yeah. I was going to say, they could. I was going to make a Parks and Recreation joke, and then I realized that TV show hasn't been on the air for like 2 years now.
Yeah,
that ship sailed. So we kind of spun off. All right, talking about that 360 video of Jakku, we spun that off into talking about the movie generally, and sort of the role that Jakku kind of might play in the movie. But there's another sort of technological piece of news that came out, which is that Oculus Rift, I guess, not really released, but they unveiled their sort of virtual reality headset that the Star Wars directors have been using. And again, we read a little bit about this in that piece about ILM Lab that Gareth Edwards, I think, was doing this for Rogue One. And so this is someone at Oculus Rift. I don't have his name here in the quote, but he says the idea here is that you can mock up your shots very intuitively if you're the director of photography, or anyone in the filmmaking process before you've gone out and planned anything in any detail. In this case, we're just looking at sketch models, low quality models that the art department mocked up early in the production to work on blocking and scale. And then later he says, it's despite any perceived similarities, the immersive form of storytelling is neither film nor video game. It's a new medium that exists somewhere between them. So then it quotes him saying, we're letting you do everything but change the story. You can change the wind, lighting, all of that, but not the story, because we're making the assumption in this test that you don't want to change the story. You want to be told a great story and see other things that complement that. So, I mean, again, this goes back to this idea of this 360-degree virtual world that you can't move the speeder bike and go off in a different direction, but you can sort of get a sense of the environment around you. That's essentially the technology that they're making available to these directors who are working, the Star Wars directors, I assume, because they're the ones working with ILM at the moment. And I would imagine that once, or if even, ILM takes on other clients that are not the Star Wars movies, or takes on other jobs that aren't the Star Wars movies, that those directors will also be able to sort of use these technology as well. So, I mean, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, I think there's that whole thing, well, we've already hammered this whole conversation about this new we're doing I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The whole idea that was hammered down in the Force Awakens, what do they call it? The 3-minute behind the scenes video.
Right.
That this whole real effects and an idea, but that's all great for nostalgia, but one of the things I've always thought about, even when I was a kid, for Star Wars, is that, storytelling goes hand in hand with technological advancement. It's kind of almost like Star Wars was also simultaneously a story and a tech demo for, like, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to be seeing in movies for like the next 5 years or whatever. And I think it's a good thing that they're doing, that they're, coming up with this concept. I mean, I don't like the idea of being in the theater with a bunch of people with second screens and going like, oh, I want to look at a 360-degree view of this scene while I'm watching a movie. I mean, that kind of stuff always, when you do it in your home, it seems to make more sense. I mean, there's all these apps with the, second screen experience and whatnot, which has had limited appeal. Usually it's just like, hey, you want to see a model of what the alien from Prometheus looked like before Ridley Scott changed it? Click on this now. But I mean, it's like I said, it's the idea of taking animatics to its next logical thing. I mean, animatic, like I said, they used the old Star Wars figures for Jedi, and then when we got to this, when we get to the prequels, there's a lot of the concept of, rough geometric representations of how the characters look. I mean, and then influenced Peter Jackson, who, you know, did a lot of previs for huge amounts of Lord of the Rings. You know, yeah, we'll have to admit that the dark side of that is that it also brought us The Hobbit, which is, you know, kind of one of this, where it ended up with video game-esque action sequences that, you know, really stretched, you know, the credibility of using that much CGI. I mean, a lot of people that kind of jump ship on the Hobbit movies just because it felt like maybe they were like the action was over massaged. Like it was like,
right.
Like it became so sophisticated in its scope that the language of the action became confusing for the viewer. So I guess my point is that, yeah, I don't think goggles are going to be a thing that people are going to reach out to experience the movie, but I feel like it's almost in 2015, it's going to be essential to, you know, cutting back on pre-production time, you know, wasted effects tests that, you know, like people doing stuff that like, oh, we have to scrap this and start fresh. Like a director will be in a better position to say, you know, this is what I want, this thing. So they don't have to render the other, you know, what is human vision? What are we saying? How much do we see in it? Like 80 degrees or something like that. It's like, well, we don't have to, or not 90. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. We don't have to spend all this time rendering all this stuff because there's no way we're going to, you know, have to have a shot that looks like X. And then they can make a lot of those decisions before they even set foot on a set with actors and, you know, natural light, that they have to get stuff done. They can kind of, you know, they can make, you know, the director can make those decisions on his lunch break while everybody else is eating. He can put on his goggles and sign off on, you know, the next day's shots and know for a fact that it's going to be, you know, if they're talking second unit or special effects stuff, that stuff that's not affected by weather. So they can, like I said, the workflow can be shortened. It's the idea that, I mean, I assume that's the number one problem facing these kind of productions. It's like, it's the idea that, you know, a director, you're dealing with two movies. It's almost like dealing with live action and an animated movie simultaneously. They're having to constantly sign off on things that they may or may not like once they're done. And I think that way, you know, I don't know if it's going to add a lot of soul, you know, the X factor to a lot of movies. I mean, I still haven't seen, you know, Jurassic World, to the point where it's like, people are like, you know, that was a kind of a people had complained that was a very soulless movie, but every indication shows that the CGI is top notch on it. But people just kind of complained. I mean, you know, we just saw, my wife and I watched Fast and Furious 7, you know, and that was a movie that had a lot of technological issues due to the death of a cast member. And like, oh, it's so amazing. We take his brother. I mean, the truth is, it still didn't look very good. The movie was, the CGI was ridiculous. And so it's so easy, you know, this idea, oh, like CGI is a problem solver. It's like, no, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you that I think this is more of like a cost saver, and that, you know, now they won't have to spend all of the man hours animating this stuff for real and then have George Lucas come in and say like, nah, make his mouth look slightly different, or give me more wind, give me more sunlight in the back of that shot or something. You know, that they can just do rough mock-ups of these environments ahead of time.
Yeah, just send it to them
and go from there.
Send it right.
I mean, what I'm slightly worried that this is just gonna facilitate, or it's gonna help directors who kind of lack that creativity or that imagination to sort of picture it in their heads ahead of time. And I mean, I go back to Blade Runner. We talk about Blade Runner a lot on this show, both because it's a common point of reference for us, but also because I have watched that 3-hour like making of documentary a bunch of times. Yeah. All right, so this is again the early days of computers. Right, this is right after Star Wars, basically. Yeah. Right after the use of computers to set up and carry out special effect shots, right? And so, Ridley Scott, he could just sort of picture it all in his head, and he kind of knew what he wanted ahead of time and knew how he wanted it to look. And yeah, he would have to go in afterwards and say like, well, this isn't quite as great, but the stuff that he would say that about is all like the concept drawings and the artwork, not necessarily the finished product or ostensibly the finished product. And then you had the special effects guys, that were using these motion controlled cameras and everything, but it took so long to do just one shot that they would basically have to figure it out in their heads first, and they would have to pre-visualize. They would have to do the pre-visualizations in their heads first, and then program the computer.
By
that
hand.
Would take several hours to do by hand, right? And then have it go. I'm sure other movies they had to do the same thing, and it didn't come out looking as good, right? So there's that part of it too. But just having that requirement of like you need to hire people who can do that, who have that kind of imagination and creativity, that they can sort of pre-visualize the shot in their head and kind of understand what they want, and then how to translate that into actually doing it. I'm worried that a little bit that some of that's going to be lost with this kind of virtual reality technology, where you can just, put on these goggles and with your iPad and be like, whoa, you can just continually tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it until it's sort of what you think you want, rather than just doing it all ahead of time.
And learning to live with your decisions.
Right, exactly.
And that influences other choices you make. That's a really good point, because it's the idea where, if you look at like a Ridley Scott, who I would say, although I've noticed critically he's been taking a hit. Like, even his older movies have been kind of taking a hit, because some people say, Blade Runner doesn't have good storytelling, but I don't even want to go down that road. But I look at how, like, the guy had money issues and, cast, and he was still able to kind of come up. I mean, he's a visual guy. We all know about him, them spending a ton of money to, like, flip over columns in Terrell's office because he didn't like the way they looked, and were being obsessed with the way that Sean Young would say the word owl, that kind of stuff. Where, that's that kind of the auteur idea of directing, where, Ridley's in his 70s now, and it's like, you look at Prometheus, and he had the entire crayon box, and the marker box, and the paint box, and the stuff, and it's like, yeah, some of the Prometheus stuff looks really great, and some of it doesn't. It still doesn't look good. Like somehow he still had practical sets, but he didn't use them right, so they actually look artificially small. Where it's like, it's like if you had you knew where you're going, but why does this set look so small when everything in the first Alien looks so big? It's just like, where did you make this mistake? And it's the idea, I think, where I have unlimited choices. I can keep making these choices up until they make the prints. I mean, I know that Star Wars Force Awakens is being filmed in 35 millimeter, so there is this idea where they do have to match CG with film and then put it back in, and then this kind of film. But I mean, maybe this is the compromise, when it's like that Disney juggernaut where it's, they're not going to have a 2.5 year, 3-year production period for these films. They're 2 year, they're less than, they're less than 2 years, because what was that? I was looking at, what was they had like some time, like, how many days till episode 8 come, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's it's under 2 years, and they've already started filming and whatnot, but
right,
if you can't, if part of being a director in 2015 is never having to finally make a decision about something, then are these movies really artistic statements anymore, or are they, business decisions that are made? It's like, special effects could be influenced, usually when a movie went into production 30, 40 years ago, it was like, they were kind of in their own little bubble. And now when people can react to something, and it's like, well, we might have to change the, now it's like they have to change, like they would take, things that might evoke 9/11 out of action movies because the movie was filmed before and edited after, and then like, oh, we have to, or some Schwarzenegger movie, they have to take this logo off because it's detrimental to a trading partner or something. It's that all of a sudden these decisions become super influential because all it is, oh, I can just bring up the movie on my computer and I can make the change.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this goes back to what we've talked about with, what role these directors are actually playing in these Star Wars films, where you have this story group, you have Lucasfilm that's kind of setting the story, and then, the directors have varying degrees of input into how that story, right? Rian Johnson clearly is shaping the story more so than, someone working on young Han Solo might be.
Right.
But even Colin Trevorrow with Episode 9. But yeah, it's I think maybe a key sentence or a key part of one of those quotes that I mentioned was the idea that, they're assuming that you're not going to want to change the story, that you're just going to want to sort of get the environment right, quote unquote, or, you want to change the wind lighting, all that, but not the story, because we're making an assumption that you don't want to change the story. But sometimes you might need to change the story, right? You might need to condense things and realize, wow, this scene isn't working, or we're going to have a 3-hour movie. We need to cut some of this down, and maybe the way we cut that down isn't just by cutting film, but it's okay. This thing that happened on Planet A, maybe instead of having them travel to Planet A and have that happen, we just need to keep it on Planet B, and so that means we need slightly different sets. We need to change the story. We need to change the script a little bit. And so maybe it's not necessarily giving them complete freedom over what they might need to do to properly tell these stories, right? The story piece of it, right? Lucasfilm Story Group, they're steering that ship, or they're the engine. They're determining what direction that ship's moving in. And then the directors are just there like, well, we just need someone to make, to just stand in front of the wheel for a couple months and, decide how bright it is on the deck or something like that. I don't know. My ship metaphor ran aground. Right. But it's that idea that, okay, well, but what if you need to change the story because the story you have now just isn't working?
Yeah. It boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Maybe we should move to a different topic. Or do you guys?
Well, so there was something you mentioned that I wasn't sure we were going to get to, but I guess it fits, which is that, so Variety reported just recently, the other day, yesterday, something, I don't know, today even, that some survey company did a survey of Star Wars fans. I assume self-identified Star Wars fans. I don't know how they found these folks, but 63% say that they expect The Force Awakens to be the best movie in the franchise to date. And of that group, 36% of respondents said, so this is the plurality of respondents, said that the reason that The Force Awakens will be the best Star Wars movie is because of more advanced CGI technology. And then you have 25% who said a more interesting story, 25% who said that it will be more true to Star Wars. 15% said it was because of J.J. Abrams, and 14% said it was because of a better cast, right? But so the plurality of this group, so what's 0.36 times 0.63, give me a second here on my calculator. But
I was told there would be no math on this podcast.
Right. So 23% of all Star Wars fans, so almost a quarter of all Star Wars fans, think that better CGI will make this the best Star Wars movie ever. So it seems crazy, right? Because you're like, oh, well, see, we heard all of this with the prequels, and that they were touting, oh, the CG, the digital effects are so much better now, it's going to make them better movies, and look what happened. And you hear this with other movies too. But maybe it's not so crazy because, the digital effects were there and I guess better for the prequels, but they also still weren't great. They were still pretty clearly digital effects, and they weren't done as cleanly and they weren't done as smoothly as they might have been with practical effects, perhaps. And here again, I'm thinking of that fight in episode 2 on Kamino between Jango Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, or even in episode, throughout the things where you have a fight scene and someone gets like kicked a really hard distance, they like fly through the air and it looks really dumb because they just like froze the frame digitally and then just like moved the guy across the frame, but without any regard for like how that would look in the physics of it. And so it just looked weird. Or, if they have people doing stuff in the background and it's digital characters, sometimes the speed is off. It's either too slow or too fast or something like that. So, the CGI technology is better now. And so maybe maybe it'll be more seamless and it will be less distracting. And so maybe it will make the movies better. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm glad people are being positive about it. You know what I mean? It's like, where they're like, oh, I don't think there's any way you could ever, top the originals and the concept. I know that there's no way that they could ever top the originals in my mind. And I'm not saying that on a critical sense. I'm saying that on a purely emotional, because I have so much baggage. So I'm already kind of away from that. That's not even like a factor. So my thing is surely like, I just hope they don't fuck it up kind of idea. And I guess CGI is one of the glaring, issues that, like, especially in, some of the stuff in the last 2 of the prequels, like just the digital set extensions and, Palpatine's office and, the kind of the waiting room on the clone Kamino thing, about how bad how that looks just terrible with Obi-Wan sitting in that weird Adirondack chair, and it's just like super bright and it's like super digital, or him. And
I wonder if they had to make it super bright because otherwise it was even more obvious that like he's not sitting on a real thing in the scene. He's sitting on like a green screened beanbag or something.
Yeah, I think that the idea that they've learned to use CGI judiciously, that might be the
right.
Like
they learned what it can do.
Yeah, it's he brings out that, what is it, Papa something or other, that has the puppet.
Right.
In that's a great example of him using it. Now it's like, if he can resist that urge that Lucas had to, like, put whatever that character, the Doug, the Sebulba character, like in every shot, all of a sudden there's like these ridiculous things that walking on its arms kind of
right
that stand out. Like those are some of the worst, because they keep showing, every time I look at those movies, they keep showing up in weird spots, and you're like, oh, I don't remember that. They put this in here? Oh, jeez, it looks terrible.
Yeah.
It's like, if you can use it, it's really the intersection of like humans and CG. If they can do it well, it's gonna, that's where they should be spending all their energy, special effects wise. Is like, it's the idea. It's like, well, they're still using, droids are still being. I assume Anthony Daniels is putting the suit back on. even though he barely wore the suit in the he didn't wear the suit in the first two prequels. The whole thing with him in I think most of his stuff in Attack of the Clones was like reshot or something like that. Because there was this whole sequence where Padme puts the armor on him and stuff like that they didn't use. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm glad people are looking forward to it, like thinking like, oh, the new thing is going to be the better thing.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have any reason not to believe except for those prequels.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about that.
So speaking of which, speaking of this kind of practical effects and props and characters, Admiral Ackbar is going to be in this movie. And not only that, but the actor / puppeteer, I guess he was an actor who was in the suit in Return of the Jedi, Tim Rose. He's also going to be portraying Ackbar again. And he's not too happy about it, or at least he's not too happy about all the secrecy surrounding this movie. So there is, I think the Australian or some Australian publication did an interview with him, and he said, so the quote is, out of the need to be secret, we're not actually able to get everything we need to do our jobs as well as we could. So it's not totally clear to me what he's referring to in terms of what they need to do their jobs as well as they could, whether that's certain materials or props. Because this came up with, especially in Return of the Jedi, I guess it did a little bit with Empire, but mostly with Return of the Jedi, was that, you know, they had to basically hoodwink people into giving them materials and land to shoot on, because it was such a huge phenomenon. They were worried that, you know, people were going to charge them through the roof just because it was Star Wars. And so in order to keep the budget down, they had to, you know, pretend they were doing a different movie or, you know, call it something else. And so I wonder if that's what he's talking about, because otherwise I'm not really clear on why the secrecy means they can't get everything they need to do their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can't imagine. I mean, yeah, they did the Blue Harvest thing for Jedi, especially when they were filming in Yuma, Arizona, which the Jabba sail barge was filmed. And I think some of the stuff in Northern California, I think they went out of that. They pretended that they were a horror movie, not to get gouged. But I mean, I don't think there's any way you could. There's in 2015. I don't think there's any way you could hide that you were a Star Wars production. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if someone's saying, I need 300 vacuum-formed laser pistols sent to, you know, Pinewood Studios, they're going to know it's for Star Wars. You know, it's that idea where it's like, even if you had it shipped to some place outside, it's like somebody in the manufacturing is going to say, like, that's a blaster. And they're just going to be like, oh, we bid too low on this job. I mean, I wonder if it's maybe the secrecy around the story, where it's like, well, you know, it'd be easier for him to act if he had a bit more context of what he was saying, you know, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
It's like, am I happy? He's like, you just told me X, Y, Z. Am I angry about this? Am I happy? It's like, oh, we're not ready to say. It's like, oh, just, you know, he did a lot of the puppeteering in Jabba's palace. He was like
throne room. Yeah.
He was the dancing Sice noodles and what I mean. I don't know who did the voice of Ackbar, if that was him or not.
I don't know who did the voice.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he doesn't even know where he's at. You know, it's like, oh, just maybe this is one of those situations where CGI is being used, where they're like, well, you know, we're going to put you in front. We've already shot the plates. You're going to stand in front of this, you know, green screen, and we're going to shoot this and put you in later, kind of idea, where it's like, you know, he's not a CG character. He's obviously, they're using animatronic skeletons or musculature inside of latex masks. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of sad, because you really want to believe that, like, this is like this thing where it's like this magical time and everybody's so happy to be there. But this is also the time when, you know, production for a lot of these actors or whatever is kind of, it's over. This is all postscript, you know, they're literally having to keep their mouth shut for months.
Right.
So it's like, maybe he's bristling at the fact that he can't even talk about it. You know, he's just,
yeah, could be,
you know, again, it's like, it didn't show up in the, well, did it show up? Did I put up my thing about Anthony Daniels in here?
Yeah. So Anthony Daniels is apparently, he's being a little,
he's off the
jerk.
He's a bit kind of off the chain, and I guess he's got a rep.
Which my impression is that he's trying to be funny in like a very British way, and it's just not going over.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he basically made fun of you know,
how old everyone else was.
Well, he said something like
the original trilogy.
He's basically said, "Oh, Harrison's fine, but poor Mark, the years haven't been good to him." And I think he made references to Carrie Fisher's bipolar episodes, and then he, you know, in the Big Smack, which, you know, this isn't the first shot across the bow. Kenny Baker a couple years ago had, you know, I think when Star Wars was pretty much done, had said, "Hey, you know, I don't like Anthony Daniels. He's rude to people. I don't like working with him. I'm glad that I don't have to work with him." And then these come up, and all of a sudden it's like, "Hey, remember when Anthony Daniels said you're a jerk?" And he's like, Anthony Daniels is like, "Well, I don't know. I haven't worked with him in years because he's never in the suit," which is kind of like, you know, I actually think that's a good thing, because I think an 81-year-old little person who his health has not been great, from what I've said. He's canceled a lot of appearances, international appearances in the last few years because he doesn't want to travel, which, you know, everybody's getting older, and, you know, yeah, he is a bit of a good luck charm. I mean, I always wondered to what extent Kenny Baker was in that suit past the first movie anyway. I mean, in Empire, and once they've gotten better at, you know, rotating the head and putting, you know, motion control stuff in there, it's, to me, it doesn't make sense to make a man go in there and have to, you know, shake it back and forth, when now they can make a BB-8 and they can just control it with the, you know, the same principle. They can say, "Oh, look how great, everybody loves BB-8," when there's like, there's not going to be all of a sudden like a, you know, Deep Roy isn't going to pop out and go, "Ah, it was me all along. I was inside of it." It's like, no, it's computer controlled. It's
right. And they don't have to worry about BB-8 like tipping and falling over.
Right.
You know, the way R2-D2 did constantly even in the prequels when they was also remote controlled.
Yeah, and it's that whole thing where people kind of try to act like, oh, you know, I can't imagine anyone else other than, you know, Anthony Daniels playing C-3PO. And maybe that's why maybe that's either one, maybe this really is a true torch passing moment, and like, Anthony Daniels, there's no reason for C-3PO or him to be nice because he's not coming back or something.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean,
and I feel bad for saying this, but like, yeah, maybe I can't imagine anyone else voicing C-3PO.
But yeah,
part of that is because Anthony Daniels like has a lockdown on any and all vocal performances. Like, even for the most minor thing, he insists on doing it. But, you know, when it comes to someone being in a suit and, you know, their head movements, you know, C-3PO's movements are pretty limited anyway.
Right.
In terms of, you know, waist, arms, neck, head. So, you know, and yeah, you could argue, and I wouldn't disagree with the idea that, you know, Anthony Daniels crafted that physical performance as much as sort of the vocal performance, but to a certain degree, the physical performance, because the movements are relatively limited, the physical performance can also be directed to some degree, right? The director can say like, okay, now tilt your head when you say this line and move your arms a little bit when you say that line. And you get a close enough approximation to sort of the original physical performance of that character. So like, yeah, I don't necessarily know how I would feel to have someone else do the voice for that character, but in terms of someone else being in the suit, like that's fine.
Yeah,
like, I don't think you lose a lot by doing that.
I mean, like 4 people played, different stuntmen played Darth Vader over the time. I'm not completely like, oh, it's not David Prowse. It's like I don't want to see it, or even Hayden Christensen. I mean, I said last week that I thought it was a nice continuity idea that they brought him back, and that's great. But there's no way you can do it 100%. But I'm not the kind of person who just sits there and compares physical movement and like, oh, it looks off, that kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe sometimes if a movie's doing it right, it shouldn't matter. You should be in it. It's not the idea,
right.
Like when they made it took me years to realize that when Roddy McDowall wasn't in the second Planet of the Apes movie. Like, I watched this documentary, I'm like, that's not Roddy McDowall? Like, oh, jeez.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't know, and I'm supposed to be, like, up on those things. I'm like, well, whatever. And it really begs the question, it's like, really, is Anthony Daniels putting the suit on? Because in that behind-the-scenes thing, they show the mask going on, but they don't show who the mask is going on.
Right.
It could be one of, there's another guy who's, like, his official body double, who does like the commercials and stuff like that, and then Daniels will dub his voice in. It's like, how do we not know that he doesn't use a double as much as Kenny Baker hasn't, been on set in years? It's like, oh, are they merely at this point consultants,
You're right. Yeah.
I mean, look at
I don't know.
The physicality of Peter Mayhew. He's had both knees replaced in the last, he had them like 6 months before filming, he had his knees replaced because, he was in bad sorts. So, I mean, I can't imagine his character, Chewie's going to be running in this. And if it is, did they, I guess at a production at, $150, $200 million production, everybody's doubled up at some point, you can just there's probably some 7'2" dude that, puts the suit on when his knees hurt, and nobody talks about it. Because you don't want to ruin the
magic.
The magic. And I think that's a little bit...
You don't want to pretend that this is like a real person who might be miserable physically in that suit.
Yeah, you don't want to go, oh, here's our legacy cast. And they're like, oh, hey, everybody, legacy cast, yeah. They don't... Right. I mean, yeah, it's that problem where you are employing older actors, yet you don't... Yeah, you want to talk about the fact that the passage of time, they want to talk about it in kind of their own terms, and they're kind of that rosy idea, like, oh, isn't it great that we're able to come back, and not the idea that time goes on, and when we hit a certain physical peak, we don't stay. And I think I guess my point is that Anthony Daniels I kind of thumb my nose at him because it's like, this is fantasy. This is not, This isn't This isn't Frontline. You don't have to tell me the ugly truth about the fact that Mark Hamill is.
Yeah, we've seen the photos.
Yeah,
we know
I've seen
what
the
Mark
photos.
Like.
When you've seen your childhood hero,
he's fine. He looks fine.
Fishing cigarettes out of a ashtray, but
yeah.
And I think that's kind of the poo-poo about it, and it's like, I understand that a lot of these guys have had. I think the guy that played Maudie or whatever, that he had I forget the actor's name. I used to hear interviews on one of the other Star Wars podcasts, and he would show up and just be really he was worked up, and he just hated Star Wars, but he knew that he could, get a couple $100, a couple $1,000 that weekend if he'd show up to something and sign some books or something, but right. He just hated it. And it's like, what's his face? Daniels has made an entire career. I honestly, I cannot think of a single thing that he has done other than Star Wars since Star Wars.
I can't either.
It's like
right.
that is his...
not even like, and even not just the movies, but like narrating documentaries or showing up to museum exhibit openings and hosting those, all that kind of stuff too.
It's like, and it's a little bit of like kind of, he has that's the kind of stuff you want to save for that Rinsler book that's going to come out in 10 years or something, where they talk about it. But I mean, I don't know. Like you said, it might be some dry English humor that.
I'm not going to dispute Kenny Baker, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Daniels is a little bit prickly to work with, we'll say. But this sounded a little bit like, he's trying to be sort of British and witty and dry, and it just didn't go over. But speaking of older actors in Star Wars movie, Max von Sydow is in The Force Awakens. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, we basically had no idea what he was doing in this movie. We have a rumor now that he is playing someone on Jakku, someone named Lor San Tekka, a village elder who has vital information about Luke's whereabouts. So, I mean, it doesn't... Surely there's a little more to his character than that. Maybe it's more of like an Alec Guinness type role where they go to him for information and then he ends up joining with them and traveling around. I can't imagine he's only there for like the one scene where they're like, oh, this guy has information, and then they find him and he tells them, and then they leave and you never see him again.
So now he wasn't part of the big cast photo, was he? Like when they
believe so, no.
When they did the thing in London and it was Driver and all those people sitting and everybody was speculating because of the way people were sitting.
Yeah, I don't think so. 'Cause I mean, aside from hearing that he was cast in the movie, like I think that's the last time we ever heard anything about what he was doing until now. I mean, I guess there was a code name for his character, which was the Vicar, but. I mean, that's like we haven't seen or heard word one from him about this movie.
Yeah, it's I mean, the thing about Max von Sydow is he's one of those guys where he can make a big impression with a relatively small role. It's I think of even him, his one of his big defining roles is he was in The Exorcist. I mean, Father Merrin, he's in the early on, and he shows up at the end for very pivotal stuff. So I mean, he is a major player, but it's not a huge role. He also had has a pretty minor role a couple years ago. Well, it's probably 10 years now. In Minority Report, where he gets to, spoiler alert.
That's right. I'd forgotten he was in that.
He plays, Tom Cruise's not boss, but kind of his advisor or whatever. And then, and one of the great ones is in John Milius's Conan the Barbarian. He plays a king he tasks Conan to find his daughter, save her from James Earl Jones, the Tulsa Doom character. And he has and it's like when he shows up, you're just like, oh wow, it's Max von Sydow. I mean, he's a versatile guy. He can do a lot with very little. So if he's only in the movie for like 5 minutes, I mean that's fine. It's kind of like one of those situations.
It's fine, but then why do you get him for it? Right, like you could get any number of honestly cheaper actors who could do it.
Why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? It adds weight. I mean, Star Wars has a long history of Max von Sydow is not a superstar. He never was. I mean, he worked with Bergman and he played Jesus in the 70s or whatever. But he's never one of those people. I mean, he was in Strange Brew, for Christ's sakes. You know what I mean? It's just like it wasn't beneath him. He's not a superstar. And it's like, I think it's good for the continuity. Like, like you said, there's Guinness and, the great Guinness. There was, having Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, having, you could make an argument, Ian McDiarmid.
Yeah, but they had more substantive roles. Even Peter Cushing, who was only in A New Hope, he had a more substantive role than just like, oh, he was a guy who had some information and they asked him and then he gave the information and they left.
Yeah.
He had more than that.
That's true.
I guess that's so, which makes me wonder then, right? Maybe there's something more about his character, assuming that this rumor is true, right? Why would a village elder on Jakku have this kind of information? Maybe there's more to his character that we find out in episode 8 or 9 or something that, I basically just, I'm not saying that I don't agree with this rumor. I don't believe this rumor, but this can't be all that there is to his character.
Well, we also don't know for a fact that he's playing a live action character.
You think they would ask Max von Sydow to do motion capture and that he would do it?
A voice, you know what I mean? Yeah, how old is he? Like 82, 83? Yeah, him in the suit seems like the idea. We still don't really know the nature. We know it's not a big role because all the principals that have a bunch of lines are sitting in that cast photo, and he's not. I think Andy Serkis is in it now that I'm looking. I have to look at it really quickly. Yeah, Andy Serkis is in it. He's the only. And Domhnall Gleeson. But yeah, it'd be kind of a waste, but I'm saying if it's not a big thing, it's kind of one of those things like, if he's just doing a voice even, it seems even more wasteful than having him in there for a 5-minute live action stuff. And how does this character know where Luke is? And, this kind of stuff with the whole, now these rumors about, Daisy Ridley's character are back up again, almost the same as Harrison Ford's, which I don't really want to go into, but the part that kind of gets me a little bit excited that I might be completely wrong. We might have been completely wrong about most of the stuff we've been talking about for these 20 episodes. Mm-hmm. That there is a lot of red herrings. If we're only seeing the first quarter, the first third or whatever of the movie, there's this whole idea that, in my mind, I'd already plotted out this whole thing. It's like, okay, there's, a Jakku, then it's going to take place on the, this thing. Then there's going to be a big battle at the end on the Starkiller base. But if all this takes place and we're still got a whole half of a movie going, that'll be quite a feat on their part of keeping that secrecy, because it's amazing that we haven't had somebody already slip up and say so far. The only thing that makes me the only thing, and this is a total speculation again, is that off of that Finn toy the speaking Finn toy, there's that line where he says, "If we go back to Jakku, we die." And I'm wondering if something has to do with the idea that they have to go back to Jakku at some pivotal point, and it'd be kind of it's going to be the Naboo thing all over again, where they we have to escape from Naboo, and then we have to go back to Naboo, and then come on, really? Bigger and better, come on. I don't know. Yeah, I like Max von Sydow. It's just. It makes me wonder. It's like, man, maybe he's just a bit of seasoning that they've added.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk about this?
So, do you want to talk about this bullhead thing?
A little bit, yeah, I do.
So, the character that we first knew as Bullhead through concept art, and then when they started showing the toys that were being released. We learned that Bullhead's it was a pilot, and that his real name was Ello Asty, Elloasty. So now it turns out that this character is basically just a Beastie Boys reference, or at least very likely a Beastie Boys reference. There's a writing on his helmet that, more or less spells out "born to ill," and of course the word "ill" shows up in multiple Beastie Boys album titles. And then an Ello Asty, if you just take away, the Beastie Boys had an album called Hello Nasty, and if you just take away the first two letters, or the first letter of each of those two words, you get Ello Asty. Originally I had heard speculation that this character was a reference to Lost, which J.J. Abrams had a hand in. So if you spell out the word Lost very quickly, L-O-S-T, it sounds a little bit like Ello Asty. Maybe it's both. That they're like, let's make a character that's a reference to Lost. let's call him Elo Asti. Hey, that's like the Beastie Boys album. Let's put some ill on his helmet. It's very possible that happened. I mean, it's fine. It feels weird to me that, and I knew this anyway, that like that's the generation that's making these Star Wars movies now. But it's like, oh, that's the generation that's making these Star Wars movies now, that they'll like put a Beastie Boys reference in to something. It just seems so weird to me.
Yeah, and it's not very obscure, and it's right out there. You know, it's, to me,
it's the reference that you put in that you want to get credit, like you want to get credit for making that reference.
Right. And it's this kind of stuff irritates the hell out of me. I mean, that was one of the things I really hated about Star Trek. The first Star Trek is that the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. Yeah, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. That they threw in that sabotage thing while the young Kirk is stealing a car or whatever. And I think there's actually a Beastie Boys song in Into Darkness. What was it called? What was the last one? Into Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's in a bar sequence, there's a Beastie Boys. I mean, and to me, like, somebody referencing Beastie Boys, it's kind of like making a reference to the Beatles. There's nothing, right. There's no edge to it. It's just this idea that the director is like, oh,
they were so huge and popular with like everyone.
Yeah.
That there's nothing like revolutionary or subversive about referencing the Beastie Boys.
Yeah, it's not like having like, it's not like making some guy that looks like Bushwick Bill or something, It's like, it's, if you're going to go, I mean, I'm of the opinion that if you're going to go for an obscure reference, go deep, go out there, maybe you might even have to tell people a year later, like, oh, this character is actually, that's supposed to be Biz Marquee or something, right. It's like, but I don't know. I mean, like I said, there's nothing edgy about making a Beastie Boys reference, which it just kind of feels gross. It just feels like, oh, it really points out the fact that like, oh yeah, you're a white dude in his mid 40s, and that was probably the last, hip hop group that meant anything to you. And it just kind of like, it doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. It kind of makes me feel a little bit embarrassed that I like music, but I don't listen to a lot of hip hop. You know what I mean? Right. It's kind of like, it's more telling about the people that go, yeah, man, that's so great, Beastie Boys. Right. Like, oh. Yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, I remember seeing them at Lollapalooza, and I spilled Surge all over my Mambo sock. It's kind of like,
God, if that doesn't date this show.
I know. I saw a dude I was watching this Keith Richards documentary. He wears a Mambo sock the whole time, and it's just like, oh man. It's just that the idea where I kind of, JJ's like 49, 50, but I get this feeling that he was a late bloomer. Because he was talking about how excited he was to go see Star Wars, and he went in costume. I mean, like the guy's like 8 years older than me, so he was like 12 going to Star Wars in costume. Right. It's like, I think JJ was a spaz. It's like, yeah, I like music. Hey kids, you guys like Beastie Boys? Yeah. Mind if I put some tunes on while I take you to the bus?
I heard my classmates playing this song on the radio, and I decided to check it out.
Yeah, like I said, you got these all those great little inside jokes in the original movies, like you find out years later, it's like, oh, one of the asteroids is actually a potato, or stuff like, I don't know. I just wish that stuff wasn't in that. It takes me out of it. I mean, Star Trek never would only refer to the past in the broadest of strokes. At some point we had, of course there was the flashbacks to, World War II or whatever, or, like the City on the Edge of Forever or whatever, but they never specifically like would reference major pop culture things, Well,
right?
What am I talking about? I've just realized I'm just having this vision of Star Trek 4 and the punk rock guy on the thing. So never mind what I said about that. When
that's all right.
The Vulcan nerve pinch to the punk rock guy on the bus. But you gotta actually make an argument that Star Trek 4 kind of cheapened the franchise in a lot of respects too. So
yeah.
Chilly.
So we're getting a lot of. I'm just gonna move ahead.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take the hint and forge on. So there are a couple things I guess we should touch on before we wrap up, which is that we're getting some big releases coming out in December and January. The first news was that they're re-releasing the original soundtracks to all 6 movies that are out so far in 3 different ways. They're called the Ultimate Editions, but it's just the original soundtracks as they were originally released. It's not, the special edition versions or anything like that. So they're all coming out on vinyl. They're all coming out on CD and then digitally as well. The initial press release didn't say a lot, but given the fact that it only said the original soundtracks and it didn't add anything else, it doesn't sound like there is any kind of remastering going on with these, and we're not going to get any extra takes or extra music. The extras are going to be a DVD of interviews with Harrison Ford, of all people, and John Williams. And then one of the, and then some of it's like scenes from the different movies set to basically like a big long music video kind of thing. So, I mean, which is unfortunate because the prequel soundtracks in particular kind of got short shrift when it came to being released. And so it sounds like, at least at this point, they're not doing anything to improve on those. They're just packaging them together rather than making you buy them separately. So it seems like an odd move. I heard some folks speculate that, well, this is just a first step and that eventually when, if they are going to repackage them and remaster them and add all these new takes and these new versions and all this other music that we haven't heard before, then they need to do this first, and that this is the first step towards doing all that other stuff. Which could be true, but I feel like I don't understand why they need to do this first step in order to do that other thing.
Yeah, I think it's just indicative of like this kind of weird area of where recorded music is. It's like CDs and digital, and it's like, well, you really don't know which side people are gonna come down to. I mean, I'd say the vast majority are gonna just be like, well, is it on iTunes? Because they already have them. They're already on iTunes right now, and I can listen to Amazon. If you have the Amazon Prime, all the original soundtracks they're streaming, which is, I think it's the 3rd editions that came out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why saying, oh, well, we're releasing them digitally as well. It's like, well, aren't they already out on digital? And aren't all of these already out on CD?
I know they tried to say, oh, well, we're doing a high res version. It's like, yeah, I think the Phantom Menace, didn't the Phantom Menace come out on vinyl recently as a kind of a record store?
It might have, yeah.
And it's,
yeah, that sounds. I mean,
I want to say that's like a 72-minute soundtrack. It's a long soundtrack, so it's a double record. I know. Yeah. I mean, I have the first Star Wars on vinyl. I have like 3 copies of them that I've collected over the years because the first edition came with this really, really awesome space battle poster that I had on my wall as a kid, and so I would, every time I go to a store and they have it, I'd go through and I flip to see if they've got the poster. And it took me like 10 years to finally get, because mine I just stick up with thumbtacks, and as the thumbtacks would get loose, I just put it in, so I had like a billion holes in the poster. So I wanted to find a nicer copy. So it took me 10 years, 15 years to find that. Now, if they were reissuing it with with those kind of goodies in it, I think that would be great. It's like Empire originally came out in a double record set, but it was incredibly limited. And then all of a sudden they cut it down to a one disc, one record set.
Right.
And Jedi was always a single record.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if they would do like that thing where it's like, oh, we're reprinting the sleeve notes, and we're reprinting we're going to do the poster, and we're going to do the booklet. I don't know if it was like the early editions came with a poster, and I think later editions came with a booklet or something like that. It was something goofy.
Mm-hmm.
If they like, so well, here's all the ephemera that you have. I mean, there's some. I mean, I don't really know how many copies of this vinyl they're going to sell. I mean, there's great companies, reissue companies out. Like there's one called Light in the Attic that does fantastic reissues. It's like I have a Public Image Limited thing, and I bought it kind of.
Yeah, I have their CD reissues of the Betty Davis albums.
Yeah, and it's just like amazing the amount of effort. Like this thing has posters and stickers and it's gatefold and what do they call tip on or something? I don't even know what that means. And like to really do it up right, did you look at how much they want for the vinyls? At the pre-order price is? It's $239. Vinyl is incredibly expensive. It's every time I go to buy something, I always kind of do I really need it on record? You know, I'm dropping $20 for something that's like just that I'm thinking like I may or may not enjoy this because I like to buy music. I still like to buy music, and it's I never did find a good copy of Empire on vinyl, but the truth is I'm sitting in this room and I'm recording at, and I can see I have this great 4 CD original soundtrack anthology if you're a Star Wars fan or you're just getting back into it, it's worth hunting down because I'm sure you can find one used. I know it's out of print right now, but at one point I was seeing them for $10. It's a 4-disc set with just some great notes, and then I went and bought the when the special editions came out, I bought those ones that had like the laser etched covers on them. I mean, they were all right. I didn't actually notice a huge difference in sound quality change. But yeah, they've remastered them since. I mean, I don't know how many times. And then it begs the question, like the idea of, if somebody throws it into a computer to rebalance it. I mean, everybody complains now that most music, the dynamic range has been completely squished.
Right. To
the point where, so you can, when I used to listen to the soundtracks, I remember because I worked at a record store. We'd had when the Phantom Menace came out, I was like, screw it, I'm going to listen to Star Wars at work because we can listen to whatever we wanted. But I would have to crank it up so loud because they kind of kept the dynamic range, which is a good thing because then you hear the subtlety, the thing. I mean, there's much more talented people that can speak on this than me, but if they're going to dump it in like
the quiets are quiet and the louds,
if they're going to throw a bunch of compression on it, and then also once it goes through a computer, and then you throw it back on a record, it's not really an analog. If you're like, oh, I want to hear, because we know that they probably recorded all the original soundtracks on a 78 or a 48 track board. In Abbey Road with all these great tube preamps or early stuff, and it's like, so when you get the record, you're getting that, the old, remember you pick up a CD and it would have AAA or ADA or ADD. It would tell you it's like analog source, digital mastering, analog reproduction, that kind of thing. If it's one of those things where the minute it gets thrown into the digital realm, there's people make an argument that you're losing sound quality anyway. So if they are running if they're doing like even a cursory remaster where they just run it through and like try to smooth out some edits or something like that, it's like you're already losing it in the analog domain. So it's kind of like, I don't know how much, I don't know how excited I am about dropping $239 on them, Yeah, and it also depends.
That's so much.
Yeah, and also it's really important now to know who's making your vinyls because some vinyls are just garbage. Like
That's true.
When they started doing this, it's like you'd go pick something up and you'd pick it up and it would literally like if you held it by the center, it would almost be like like a bowl. The vinyl, there's so little actual, you know, it has to be, you know, you can do 180 gram vinyl, you can do 108 gram virgin vinyl, you can do, doesn't it get up to, isn't there like a 240 gram vinyl now that they...
That's beyond my vinyl.
I bought something recently that it was like, oh, it was hefty vinyl. And then I realized that not only that, you had to speed it up to 45 RPM because that's it. That speed, the resolution, it's like when Metallica, they redid all their 3 classic records, and it was like a 4 record set because, you know, every one of their songs was at 45 RPMs for the resolution. Every one of their songs are 7 minutes, and I'm like, oh, am I going to be flipping these things every 10 minutes or something? It's like, I just want to chill on my couch and like listen.
Right.
And I don't think Star Wars Star Wars vinyl is gonna, you know, inspire me to spend $250 or whatever to have all these on record.
Yeah, no, me neither. And then I don't own any vinyl myself, but even then, I'm someone who potentially could be like, oh yeah, maybe I will, you know, buy these, and you know, that'll be the start of me getting back into vinyl. And that's, I don't see the appeal, at least in this form, where it's just the original soundtracks with nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
nothing else. You know, they're not like we said. It doesn't sound like they're remastering it. Really, we're not getting any extra takes of anything. It's I don't know.
I mean, I'd like to.
I guess if this is the first step they have to take, okay. But I'm still not clear on as to why they can't just do it all at once and, you know, give us all the new stuff we haven't heard before at the same time we get these.
Yeah, and also, and to me, if that's Disney's philosophy of it, then that doesn't bode well for these rumors about, you know, an altered original trilogy coming out. Because then, or are they just going to say like, well, we've already got, you know, we already put out the digital Star Wars, and like, I don't think enough people bought it, so we're not going to. I don't think there's enough of a demand for that, which is, you know, complete bupkis. Right. But it's, yeah, I don't know. It's like, I would love to hear all that unreleased stuff from Attack of the Clones, because we all know that there was a ton of re-edit. That was the most problematic of the productions. That one that changed the most from its initial version to, you know, I heard that it really kind of, there was a lot of tension between like Ben Burtt and John Williams, because Ben Burtt was editing the film and doing sound editing and doing some mixing.
And basically making the decisions that, well, my sounds are going to get priority over the music here.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, there'd be a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of stuff. That kind of, at this point, that's the only stuff that interests me. Because if it's just like the, you know, that same music I can listen to because I have all of them thing. Yeah, you're going to have to add, you know, if there was a book or something like Rinsler did a book about, or the guy that does the Star Wars Oxygen did a book or something about it. Because I mean, that guy, what's his name? David Collins. I would say that would be, you know, Star Wars Oxygen. That's a great podcast. It's kind of intermittent. It comes out about once a month or something. I mean, that's really the definitive soundtrack there. I think they're just starting Revenge of the Sith. I think they spend like 4 or 5 episodes per movie, so it's kind of one of those things.
Yeah, they really dig into soundtracks. It's great. It's a great podcast.
Unfortunately, I don't have a good enough music background to talk with you on this stuff. That when you bring it up, I'm kind of like, I get it. It's music.
Well, yeah, I mean, and my own music background is so far away from me now that a lot of the stuff that I might want to comment about it, I don't remember enough to be able to comment on it. So that's the soundtracks, but then we're also on December 18th, the same day that The Force Awakens comes out, the same day that The Force Awakens soundtrack comes out, same day that The Art of The Force Awakens comes out. We're getting another whole mess of Star Wars books. Most of which look like either reference books. So, like I said, The Art of the Force Awakens or The Force Awakens Visual Dictionary, that kind of reference books. Or they're books aimed at sort of younger readers or teenage readers. So it's a lot of like sticker books or things like that.
Like what was Kylo Ren doing like the day before The Force Awakens or something like that?
Right. There is a book called Before the Awakening, which is it was billed as sort of a companion to the other Journey of the Force Awakens books, I think, like Weapon of a Jedi and things like that, where it shows Rey and Finn and Poe Dameron on the cover, and it's sort of about what they were up to before the events of the Force Awakens, which could be interesting, but if it is similar to those other Journey of the Force Awakens books, it's probably aimed at too young an audience for me to actually bother reading. But you had a nice catch looking at the visual dictionary cover. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's just I noticed the cover is, again they're kind of keeping in that realm of like they're not wanting to give too much away, so it's all your characters, but it's how you've always seen them. It's Rey in her weird mummy outfit and Finn in his stormtrooper armament, and then there's Kylo Ren on the front, and there's a little indicator because he has his lightsaber out. They actually refer to it as a, quote, plasma blade and not a lightsaber.
Yeah, which is interesting. And we've heard, that his training in the Force is rough or maybe not. Maybe he's not very strong, which is why his blade is a little ragged. And so maybe if he's not actually much of a Force user, then he can't call it a lightsaber. So I took the time to look this up on Wikipedia, just for my own edification. But so lightsabers, this is their definition of a lightsaber. The canon definition consisted of a plasma blade powered by a kyber crystal in Jedi weapons or a Sith crystal in Sith weapons and emitted from a metallic hilt. So it's still a plasma blade in a lightsaber. So then the question is, well, then why did they make this semantic difference on the cover? And why not just call it a lightsaber? So maybe you have uncovered something about the story here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that Wikipedia is just a fan thing anyway, so it could easily be rendered obsolete. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been hampering, like, they don't like the cross guard, and it becomes like, well, I think we're going to find out at least. I mean, I don't know. Hopefully they weren't going to spend a bunch of time over-explaining it, but this idea that, like, yeah, this isn't necessarily the lightsaber. That's maybe partly the reason why he wants one so badly. It's like I don't know. Now I'm completely spacing what I was going to say. Oh, sorry. All right, we got to move on. My brain just shut down.
Well, the only other book I wanted to mention was so for a lot of these books they showed the covers, but then there was a list at the bottom of the press release that for books that didn't have covers, and there's one called Star Wars: Finn and the First Order that I think could be interesting. I guess it'll be interesting for whatever generation it's aimed at, but because there's not a cover, I don't have a good sense of whether it's aimed at younger readers or if it is a novel that with just the title of the novel is just the name of the main character, like Tarkin or Kenobi or Darth Plagueis, however you pronounce it. That they started doing towards the end of the, I guess, before, around the time that they started redoing the canon, that they were running out of titles, and so they were just naming the books after the main character, and they're sort of, the books are sort of character studies of these characters more than plot driven things, and so it's possible, I mean, that this is a similar deal, where we're learning a little bit more about Finn and the First Order. So if it's a novel aimed at more adults, I think that could be really neat. If it's a novel aimed at kids, or it's a book aimed at kids, that's fine too. But
if it's a pop-up
book,
but
it is a little weird to me that they didn't really announce any novels aimed at even teenage readers. There aren't really any even young adult novels in this list as far as I can tell, let alone grown-up novels, quote unquote, because they're still novels about Star Wars. But
Exactly.
because there's Twilight companies coming out at some point, which is the tie-in novel for Battlefront. And at some point, the second Aftermath novel will come out. But other than that, I don't know what they're working on, what they have in the pipes in terms of publishing.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. It's kind of like that thing where maybe that's good because I haven't been impressed yet. There hasn't been anything.
Right.
It's like maybe they're like, well, let's. But it takes forever to write a book, so it's kind of unless you're writing.
Well,
Aftermath.
apparently not.
Unless you're writing Aftermath, which it's like
right.
That guy squirted that one out. It's
right.
like maybe it's just a good time for them to kind of, Well, then you also have that idea. It's like the idea of a limited amount of marketing. It's like, well, we have to immediately shift gears. It's like they're gonna. The Force Awakens is going to carry on through, April, maybe May, and then they have to talk about Rogue One. When is Rogue One coming out? They have to start going towards the promotion of that and tie-ins for that. And then by the time they do that, they're going to be looking down the barrel at Episode 8. So it's kind of this thing where maybe they don't want to sully the water too much.
And Star Wars Rebels is premiering in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and there was just an announcement on Twitter during the show that I guess they're going to be coming out with Rebels is going to have its own magazine now.
Okay.
Which is like, okay, it's like I wasn't even sure that they were still doing the Star Wars magazine. But I guess they are. I kind of picked one up the other day, and it's like, it's news comes so fast now. By the time it's in magazines, it just feels old anyway. It's like the heyday of a great Star Wars fan magazine to me is like, that's far gone. I think it was like Star Wars Insider or something. They changed the name of it, but back in the day, that was a Star Wars magazine. Not this crap. Not this narrow view crap. Anyway, I think I've exhausted my notes or your notes or the notes this week.
Yeah. Well, so that's I think that's a good place to wrap up then.
Yeah. I think next week. Won't have time by next week, but hopefully the week after next or whenever I can give you a report on Star Wars Battlefront's doing their beta for PlayStation and Xbox One. Although I've been hearing a lot of bad news about the quality of the game, that it's essentially going to be shipped, quote, broken. And if you're a person who follows video,
or buggy.
If you're a person who follows video game news or buys a lot of games when they're current, that's pretty indicative of the industry right now. It's basically, that everybody is shipping product that's broken, and then they spend the next 6 months trying to fix it. So I hope that's not really the case, but I've seen some pretty damning evidence that it is. But I'll try it out and I'll let you know what I think of it.
All right.
If you'd like to,
please do.
Yes, if you'd like to interact with us online, best way is to @reply us at Talking Birdcast on Twitter. You can email us at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, although I haven't been really using it because it just feels like it's kind of musty, and it's not a good place to interact with our listeners. But it is at / Facebook. I know, really selling it. / it's a Facebook / Talking Bird Podcast. We also have a Tumblr. Have you been doing stuff with the Tumblr? I haven't really seen anything.
I have not. I keep saying I need to pick it back up, and I will eventually.
You just go ahead.
There might be some stuff this week, and
preeminently, you want to subscribe to us at talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com. So when John has time, because he is a busy man, he has time to put up some stuff. You'll be in the pipe. You will be locked and loaded for all that great visual information. You can review us or rate us on iTunes. I'd like that. We're still hovering at 11 rates and like maybe 8 reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to. I mean, what do you guys need? Do you need a contest or something? I don't think I have anything that you would want around the house. I remember at one point for the Eagle Heart show, we were trying to give away a copy of The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, signed, because I found it in a box. That didn't do too well. So I don't know. I don't really have anything Star Wars to give away that I want to give away, because I got rid of most of it. I could give you like a
We don't have Disney or Hasbro or Hot Wheels or anyone sending us toys to give away to promote their new lines. So.
How do we get that?
I don't know.
I tried to connect with those marketing people, but the requirements are pretty steep, and I don't think they'd probably find out I thought Anthony Daniels is a bit of a prick, and then I wouldn't get any of that Star Wars gold. Anyway. I will thank you for listening to Talking Birdcast, the special edition. And we will be back soon for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
And I'm John Llewellyn, and I thank you for listening as well.
Yes. And may the Force be with you.